Okay, welcome to this first episode of Quick Bits. I'm going to try and talk relatively quickly. We're going to get through this fast and learn just the most important things in shorter, easy to consume videos. So this one's about tools and shortcuts. So right off the bat, the theme throughout this is going to be using shortcuts on your keyboard. So let's run through some of the basic tools really quick and then we'll get into the cool stuff. So here you have your general selection tool, shortcut V on the keyboard. This you can use to just drag clips around. This is the one you're typically using. And if you want to cut a clip back, you can use this tool to just cut that clip back. It's also kind of cool. You can use it to expand that clip if you know that there's more there. It'll just kind of recognize that there's more to that footage and it'll elongate it. That's typically way better than using something like our next tool, the C tool or the razor tool, and cutting something and deleting it. You can do that, but it's typically not the best way to go unless you have a really complicated timeline and it makes more sense to try to cut something like that rather than like move it with the selection tool, the V tool. One other thing about the cut key that I forgot to mention is if you want to cut all the clips vertically, all the layers at a certain point, you can hold shift and that'll have a razor tool that goes across every clip as opposed to just a single one. All you have to do is hold shift while you cut. So that brings us on to our next tool, the ripple edit tool, ripple delete tool, which is B, as you can see here. And what that does is it's similar to the selection tool, but when you cut something back, it'll jump the whole project forward in order to keep this initial edit point. You might have seen that. So say there's this beginning part where Andrew's walking here. We don't want that. We could come here, cut it out to this point, and then you can see it'll edit it so it starts at that point. And we cut out that beginning. So that can be really handy to just say, save time. You don't have to move things around. You can just cut really quickly. Okay, our next one after that is going to be the rolling edit tool, which is N. And what this does is essentially move the edit point. So if you have two clips side by side here, and we know that both of these clips have extra footage that is just not being displayed. So say we want this edit point to just come sooner, we could grab that edit point and just move it up, and that'll make this left clip shorter and this right clip longer. Oftentimes I use this tool when I'm working on titles or something where the footage doesn't really matter. It's just where I want things to edit or things to cut. And so this can be a really useful tool when doing stuff like that or cutting to B-roll or something. It can be pretty handy to speed up the edit point moving process. Okay, so next after that we have the slip tool. This is actually really handy. So say I like how long this clip is, but I just don't like the segment of footage in it. So here I'm riding on my longboard getting this big shot of Andrew sitting here on the Great Lawn, but say I want an earlier portion of this shot. I can just slip this footage, and what's that do? And that's keeping these edit points the same. It's just moving it, so now I'm looking at an earlier portion of footage. So let's slip it even more, and I'm at an even earlier point. I'm not even, the camera's not even up and ready yet. Or I could slip it backwards, and we're much later in the clip. So that's how you can keep the edit points the same, but just move or slip this footage back and forth kind of inside its container on the timeline. Okay, and then kind of maybe in the same vein is the slide tool. So what this will do is it'll allow you to move a clip in its entire, or an isolated clip here, but things around it will kind of follow it. So here, if I move this, you'll notice that this clip on the left got longer and this clip on the right got shorter, and I can move it back, but this one in the middle is staying the same. So I'm sure that there's times when you'd want to use that. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but that's definitely one to keep in mind. It can come in really handy just to save time. Seconds matter, and really memorize all these shortcuts, especially for the V tool, for B, for rolling edit, for C, for cutting. Some of those are really important. Y for slipping. So make sure you got those down. Okay, one of my favorite tools that I actually just learned about recently is the Q and W tools. And so what those are used for is, say you have a clip here, but there's just something wrong with this first portion of the clip, but you want to use the rest of it. This happens all the time. What you can do, instead of like cutting it here, and then dragging it over and dragging everything else over or something, or even using the ripple edit tool, you can just come here, move your playhead to wherever you want it to cut, press Q, and it just cuts off that first portion of the clip and moves your playhead back there. It ripple deletes all of that, and so everything lines up perfectly. So if you're here, you're say halfway through the clip and you just don't like the first half, Q, and it'll cut everything in the timeline and just cut out that portion going back to the last to the end point of that clip. Similarly, you can do W, and that'll cut out the front side. So you got Q and W. These are huge time savers, and I can't believe I didn't know about them earlier. Another one I really love, and this is especially helpful when editing interviews, is if you're playing the timeline, you can press L, and it'll play at double speed. You can press L again, and it'll play at triple, and I think L again, it'll just kind of keep going. And so then you can listen to interviews at double speed, and it makes editing so much faster. Likewise, so there's kind of a trio there. You have J, K, and L. L is speed up, K is play and pause, or maybe just pause, and L is reverse. So you can have some fun with that, going forward and backwards and pausing and stuff like that. So you have J, K, and L. Those are super, super handy. Another thing that you should definitely know is the arrow keys. If you press up on the arrow keys, you go to the beginning of a clip. If you press down on the arrow keys, you go to the end. And then if you press forward and backwards on the arrow keys, you're just going one frame at a time. Again, these are just super critical. Use them all the time. Also, what you may have noticed me doing is the plus and minus keys. So in between your 0 and backspace button, you have plus and minus, and that just lets you zoom in and out of your timeline really quickly. And I use this to just constantly to navigate between different portions of what I'm editing. Also, definitely don't forget the tilde key. The tilde key is below the escape, to the left of 1 and above tab. I hope that gives you enough reference. It's tilde. And see how this timeline window is highlighted in blue right now? You can also highlight another window. Whatever window you're highlighting, if you press tilde, it'll make that window full screen. And that gives you a ton more real estate to see what's going on in your timeline, especially if you have a lot of layers or just a complicated edit. You can also press tilde on the preview and get a much larger preview, which is constantly useful. So tilde key maximizes windows, don't forget. Okay, another thing that's super handy is say you want to delete a clip, but you don't want to lose track of it. You just don't want it at the moment. You can highlight a clip and do Shift E, hold Shift and press E, and that disables the clip. So it kind of darkens it, and it's like it doesn't exist for a moment, but if you ever want it back, it's there at a moment's notice. So this can be really handy to stay organized and kind of keep your clips close by, but not enabled. Also, don't forget about the snapping tool. So snapping is here. What this lets you do is if snapping is turned on, then when you're editing things, they will cling or they will snap to your playhead or they will snap to other clips. And that's really helpful to make sure you don't have any gaps when you're editing. But sometimes you'll just require more precise actions, especially if you're cutting or something like that and you don't want to snap to the playhead. You can turn snapping on and off. And that will make it so you can do more precise edits when you want to. And that's the shortcut S. Very important one. Also, one that I'm using more and more these days is markers. And so if you press M, that creates a marker. If you have a clip highlighted, it creates a marker inside that clip. If you don't have a clip highlighted, then if you create a marker, it creates it on the timeline. So those can have different applications. But then you can use these markers to denote different areas. One thing is if you're on the exact time that a marker happens, if your playhead is lined up with that marker, you see it kind of shows up here, then you can press M again, or I'm highlighted a clip there, you can press M again, and you can name that marker, and you can increase its duration. This is the cool part. So if you increase its duration just a little bit arbitrarily here, then this marker becomes longer. Wow, that was longer than I thought. This marker becomes longer, and then you can name different portions of your project. So say this is the interview portion, you can say interview portion, and then it makes it super easy at a glance to figure out where your stuff is. And this is really seamless. So you can just press MM, and there you have whatever you want, and increase the duration a little, and then it's actually hidden there. Or where'd it go? Oh, I made it on these clips. Okay, so be careful. Make sure you figure out if your marker's on a clip or if it's generally on the timeline. I'll do Ctrl Z there. Okay, and then of course you can delete your markers by right-clicking and saying Edit Marker, Delete. You can't really just click and say delete, so you have to do the Edit Delete thing. Okay, and finally, one thing that's super important is that you should just remember that you can make these audio tracks taller and shorter. This is really helpful when editing an interview. You can kind of see when someone stops talking, just by looking at the audio waveform is what we call this. And that can really help speed up the editing process. Additionally, you can increase and decrease the volume here on the timeline, which is super handy. And if you hold Control or Command, Control on Windows, Command on a Mac, you can set keyframes here, and then you can control the volume or the amplitude of this audio over time. So say I want it to start soft and become super, super loud, then that will happen over that period of time. You can use this in music to put audio in the background and then have it come up to the foreground again. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and this is a tool we're using constantly. One thing to note is that this will only increase the volume by 6.02 decibels. I don't know why that number, but that's the case. You can decrease it down to infinity, and if you want finer controls, you can hold the Command key or the Control key while dragging this, and that will give you fine control over how loud it is. So sometimes it's really hard to line this up because it kind of increases exponentially down here. So you can hold Control and get really nice fine adjustment. If it doesn't go loud enough or soft, or I guess just loud enough here for you, you can right click on the audio and say audio gain, and then you can adjust the gain by whatever you want. If you want, say, the whole thing to just normalize to a maximum volume, then you can say normalize all peaks to, say, 0 decibels, and you'll see that that makes this audio its full loudness. So then you can do this for, say, a bunch of different clips. You can do this for, say, a bunch of different clips. Right click, audio gain, normalize each individual peak to 0 decibels, and then all of these become 0 decibels, and so we kind of maximize the loudness in one fell swoop there. Okay, very last thing is when you are ready to render out your project, you can just do Control or Command M. That will bring up, here on my second monitor, that will bring up the rendering window here. Set whatever you want. You should see that in another video. And click Q, that will fire up Adobe Media Encoder. And then the reason we use Adobe Media Encoder is that it just keeps Premiere Pro active. So if you export directly from Premiere Pro, it locks the whole, and that could be really inconvenient. So if you export from Media Encoder, it gives us more flexibility with having Premiere open. Okay, so as I started editing this episode, I noticed just 2 things I wanted to cover really briefly. I was getting in here to line up my audio and video, and one thing struck me. It's pretty clear how these should line up. This peak here should line up with this peak here. But when I was going to do this manually, because it doesn't seem too hard to do it manually, I noticed like when you drag this audio, you lose track of where the peaks are. And so it gets really actually kind of difficult to line this up. So a quick fix using what we learned is I just created a marker right here just by pressing M while that clip was highlighted. And so that marker is specific to this clip. Then I just put my playhead where I want that marker to line up. Make sure snapping is turned on. And now when I drag this into place, you can see the it catches right there as things are lining up. And I guess I didn't do quite a good enough job placing this marker, but there we go. That looks actually really pretty solid. So that's a quick tip with using markers. And then after I line that audio up, I said, oh darn, well I don't want 2 similar but different audio tracks playing. And so what I can do is I know that this green audio is the one I want to keep, so I can just solo that. And that makes it so that out of all the audio tracks playing, this is the only one that's going to actually shine through. This is the only one that that's going to be heard. Similarly, you can also mute tracks. You can solo multiple tracks, and then all of the solo tracks will be played. And you can also turn off video. So if there's a layer of video that you don't want to see, or even just while editing, you can turn things off. And then so that's really handy. So those are the last 2 tips. Okay, thanks for watching. See you guys later.